Welcome, everyone, to The Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. Today, we're looking at one of the most uniquely bizarre geographic standoffs in modern history. We are exploring the story of Doel. Now, this is a tiny village in Belgium that has literally been fighting for its life for over a century. If you love stories of stubborn survival and weird structural anomalies, well, you are in the exact right place, because this isn't just some story about a town that refused to move. It's a literal masterclass in how a small group of people used legal loopholes, vibrant street art, and honestly, sheer, uncompromising stubbornness to halt a multi-billion-dollar industrial machine right in its tracks.
So imagine waking up one day and being told your entire town is simply in the way. It's a totally unthinkable premise, right? But for the residents of Doel, this wasn't some hypothetical thought experiment. No, it was a very real official eviction notice from the unrelenting march of modern progress. We're talking about generations of families who had built their lives in this quiet place. Deep roots, history, the whole shebang. And suddenly, a letter arrives essentially saying, hey, pack it up, the port needs your land. I mean, it strikes at this universal fear, the terrifying idea that your home, your sanctuary, can just be erased by forces completely out of your control, all just because it happens to sit on the wrong plot of geography.
And you really have to grasp the sheer scale of what Doel was up against here. We are dealing with an absolute David versus Goliath dynamic. On one side, you have the Port of Antwerp. This isn't just some bustling dock. It is a massive, rapidly expanding, global economic powerhouse stretching for miles and handling hundreds of millions of tons of cargo. An absolute industrial leviathan. And right on its doorstep, the tiny, trapped village of Doel. Geographically, this place is squashed right between this sprawling, hungry port and the Dutch border. It's basically a tiny speck of residential life floating in an ocean of cranes, shipping containers, and concrete. Looking at how completely surrounded it is by industrial sprawl, honestly, it's a total miracle it hasn't been swallowed up yet.
So, to understand how this geographic trap was actually set, we need to go back a bit. Section 1. The industrial squeeze. A town trapped.
You see, Doel isn't just a small town. It's a lone survivor in a literal graveyard of small towns. The grim reality of this region is that most neighboring villages were actually destroyed a long time ago. As the Port of Antwerp sought to expand its dominance, it systematically consumed the surrounding landscape. Entire communities, with their own histories and cultures, were just wiped completely off the map to make room for massive industrial and public works projects. Docks were dug, factories were built, and neighboring villages like Oosterweel, Wilmersdonk, and Lillo were effectively sacrificed in the name of economic growth. So Doel is this bizarre anomaly today. It stands completely alone, functioning as a living museum surrounded by the ghosts of towns that the port already devoured.
Now, this pressure didn't happen overnight, right? It was a slow, escalating squeeze. Doel has this rich, centuries-old history as a quiet, long-established agricultural village. But as we move into the late 20th century, the port's relentless expansion severely complicates the village's existence. The land Doel sits on suddenly shifted from sleepy farmland to incredibly valuable real estate for international shipping infrastructure. The government and port authorities started drawing up massive expansion plans that literally drew a line right through the heart of the town. And that brings us to the 1980s, which served as an absolute breaking point. The pressure campaign reached a fever pitch. Residents were subjected to buyouts, building bans, intense psychological pressure. The message from the authorities was crystal clear. Your time is up.
But the residents, they didn't just pack their bags. Section 2. The squatter resistance. Fighting back.
The 1980s marked a major, energetic shift in tone for Donemil. The locals decided it was time to fight back. And you know what's so fascinating about this era? It's how some locals actually described it. They ironically called it the fun times of resistance. Yeah, really. It wasn't a time of quiet despair or grim resignation. No, it was a period of intense, highly active, and sometimes strangely spirited pushback against this massive industrial machine knocking at their doors. The community totally banded together. There was this deep, infectious sense of camaraderie. They were throwing neighborhood parties, organizing action groups, and finding genuine joy in their shared defiance. They literally turned their existential threat into a unifying cause. And this resistance was fundamentally a physical stand for survival. We're not just talking about a polite protest with a few signs waved at City Hall here. People actively started squatting in the buildings. The moment a resident caved to the pressure and moved out, activists and squatters would immediately move right in to take their place. Why? Well, because under local law, an occupied building presents a massive legal headache.
Empty buildings can be swiftly boarded up and bulldozed, no problem. But if someone is living inside, the government has to go through a lengthy, tedious, and very expensive legal eviction process. By squatting, they were literally putting their bodies in the way to gum up the bureaucratic works. They were physically keeping the village's heart beating, transforming every single empty home into a legal fortress.
However, despite this incredible grassroots effort, the wheels of industry are incredibly heavy. Section 3, Demolition and Legal Salvation. A massive twist. So was this the end for Dale? We hit the absolute darkest moment in the town's history. The government eventually moved forward, the bulldozers actually arrived. I mean, you have to imagine the visceral reality of this. The deafening noise of heavy machinery, the dust filling the air, the sheer heartbreak of seeing historic homes actively being torn down to clear the land. It was no longer just a threat, the destruction was actively happening. Beloved community landmarks were reduced to rubble. For the residents watching those excavators tear into their neighbors' houses, the tension must have been suffocating. It truly looked like the resistance had failed, and Dale was inevitably destined to become just another memory swallowed by the port. But right at the 11th hour, we get a massive plot twist. Demolitions had begun, sure, but citizens and heritage action groups absolutely refused to quit. They filed aggressive emergency injunctions, taking the fight straight to the highest courts. And suddenly, the legal system stepped in. The courts recognized that the government's plans had severe flaws regarding environmental regulations and historical preservation. A series of landmark rulings officially halted the destruction. The judges effectively slammed the brakes on a multi-billion-dollar industrial expansion right at Duel's borders. It is incredibly rare to see grassroots activists legally outmaneuver an entire national infrastructure project, but they actually did it. They were miraculously saved by the gavel.
Which leaves us with a truly unique situation in the present day. Section 4. The Ghost Town Today. A bizarre limbo. Because that legal salvation happened after demolitions had already started, Duel now exists in a bizarre serial limbo. It is partially abandoned, with literal chunks of the town permanently missing where the bulldozers struck first. But the buildings that remain, they've undergone an incredible transformation. They are entirely covered in vibrant, world-class street art. Renowned international artists, totally drawn by the town's defiant spirit, have turned the brick walls into giant canvases, painting massive, striking murals of animals and surreal figures. So instead of being erased, Duel has evolved into this quirky, globally recognized ghost town. It serves as a powerful, highly visible symbol of community resilience. It's a living, breathing art installation proving that sometimes you simply cannot delete a community.
It forces us to ask, what happens when a small group of people decides to stand up to an entire country's industrial machine? Well, in the case of Duel, they created an accidental, art-covered monument to staying put. It's a fascinating piece of history that challenges everything we assume about the inevitability of modern progress. If you enjoyed this explainer and want to jump into more deep dives on abandoned marvels and transit oddities, make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow at What on Earth Is This? Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next explainer.